I stood motionless at the wedding hall door. My tuxedo, one I had spent so much money on, fitted perfectly, yet my heart thumped against my ribs. The heat from the room pressed against my skin, oppressive after months of planning and tailoring. Everything to perfection. But it wasn't the heat that weighed on me. It was the betrayal. I had entered expecting to see Rachel, my wife-to-be, waiting at the altar. Friends and family gathered, prepared to witness the start of our new life together. Instead, her mother stood there to welcome me. Standing tall in the center of the aisle, she smiled, a smile that could cut through steel, and said, "You're no longer needed." Her voice was horribly beautiful, tilting her head as if she had rehearsed this moment. I blinked, sure I had misheard her. The murmuring in the hall grew louder as heads turned, eyes shifting between me and her. And then, there, she was, Rachel, perfect, immaculate makeup, curls cascading over one shoulder, and a dress that flowed around her like she was royalty. But there wasn't a single glimmer of the fairy tale I had bought into. Without hesitation, without second-guessing, her expression shifted from composed to something almost ashamed. "My Alpha brother will take your place," her mother continued, her tone oozing with something that made my stomach twist. It didn't make sense. I had expected to spend my life with Rachel. I had spent $15,000 on this wedding, ensuring every one of her dreams came true. And now she was standing there letting her mother tell me I had been replaced? The room's whispers intensified into a wave of condemnation. Some guests turned, their heads away, unwilling to meet my eyes. Others watched me uneasily, waiting for me to explode. Rachel's mother, her grin widening, raised her voice just enough for the guests to hear. "You have two choices," she said. "Leave or sit in the audience and watch a real man marry my daughter." The insult burned hotter than I expected. My hands clenched, my veins searing with anger. The taste of humiliation sat heavy on my tongue. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to lash out, to make them regret this moment for the rest of their lives. But instead, I took a deep breath. I looked Rachel in the eyes, searching for something, anything, that showed she understood what she was doing. A flicker of hesitation, a moment of doubt. There was none. Only a smug sense of accomplishment. She believed she had won. Gasps filled the room as I turned around and walked out. She thought I was weak. She thought I was broken. Rachel's mother's arrogant demeanor wavered for a split second, as though she hadn't really expected me to leave. She thought they had won. Let them. Because an hour later, as I sat in my car, my tuxedo jacket flung onto the passenger seat and my tie loosened, I realized something. This wasn't over. The phone buzzed beside me, but I ignored it, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. It rang again, and again. On the fourth time, I answered. Rachel's high-pitched, anxious voice broke through. "You ruined everything!" The audacity nearly made me laugh. My voice was eerily calm. "I ruined everything?" "You took my place at my own wedding. You let your mother erase me from my own day. And now you have the nerve to call me?" Her breath hitched. More frantic yelling followed. "The wedding is a mess! The guests are leaving!" A lazy smirk curled on my lips. "Good. You don't understand. Matthew!" "Oh, I understand perfectly, Rachel." She started to say something else, but I hung up. Because they thought I would slink away in shame. They thought I would give up. They didn't know me. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts. The first call was to the venue manager, Mr. Carter. He picked up after 2 rings. "Everything going well at the wedding?" I asked, almost laughing at the irony. "Yes, sir. Good. Shut it down. Cancel everything." A pause. "Sir, the wedding is happening right now. Not my wedding," I cut in. "If they want to replace me, let's see how they handle a wedding without my money." Another long pause. "Would you like a refund?" I almost laughed. "No need. Just cancel it all. Then came the catering. The moment they arrived, I made the call. Turn the trucks around, the voice on the other end stammered. Sir, we're in the middle of a delivery. And now you're in the middle of leaving. No food, no refund. I pictured the guests, seated at their tables, waiting for a feast that would never come. Next came the decorations. Rachel had chosen everything, with my money. The silk table runners, the floral arrangements, the lighting. I called the decorator. Pack it up. Take it all back. Sir, but the wedding isn't happening. Then, the DJ. He chuckled nervously when I told him to pack up. Wait, is this a joke? I grinned. I was told I'm no longer needed. Neither are you. By the time I was done, I had dismantled every piece of their wedding. Now, it was time to watch the collapse. I grabbed a coffee at a nearby cafe, ignoring the flood of calls from Rachel and her family. I took a sip, savoring it, when my phone rang again. Rachel, I answered, voice calm. You need to fix this. The guests are complaining. There's no food, no music, no decorations. It's a disaster, I smirked. Get your real man to handle it. Silence, then softer, almost pleading. Matthew, please, just fix this and we can talk later. I leaned back. Salvage it, Rachel? You threw me out of my own wedding like I was disposable. Now without me, you have nothing, and that's not my problem. Her voice wavered. It was my mother. She said it was the right thing to do. I scoffed. Oh? So now you're a puppet? Silence. Let me ask you something, Rachel. I leaned forward. When she told you to replace me, did you hesitate? Did you even think about standing up for me? More silence, I grinned. That's what I thought. And I hung up. Meanwhile, back at the venue, chaos erupted. Guests sat at empty tables, whispering. Some left discreetly, while others weren't so subtle. Rachel's mother stormed through the hall, barking orders at bewildered staff. The so-called alpha groom paced near the altar, realizing he had just stepped into a disaster. One by one, vendors packed up. The DJ left. The food never arrived. The flowers disappeared. Rachel stood in the middle of the now empty hall, watching her perfect day crumble around her. And then, someone spoke up. Wait, wasn't Matthew supposed to be the groom? And the whispers turned into laughter. A friend at the wedding texted me, Dude, a cop just showed up. I nearly spit out my coffee. Because this was only the beginning. I flashed her a chilly, sardonic smile and muttered, I don't know what to do. You made this mess, Rachel. Now you have to deal with it. She shakily exhaled. You're truly completing this? Her tears came more intensely with each final step, something I never intended for. I moaned as it went this far. You intended for me to vanish in silence, but I didn't. I tilted my head and gulped hard while wiping at her face. I suppose I deserved this. For a few more seconds, Rachel stood there, her chest rising and falling in shaky breaths, before eventually reversing course and making her way back to her car, where I watched her drive away and vanish. The battle was over into the night, but her family's struggle was far from over. The days following Rachel's terrible wedding felt like a watershed, and the fallout was only getting started. It was worse than I had anticipated, and the credit card fraud case was proceeding quickly. It appeared that my case had opened up a lot because Rachel's mother was now the focus of a thorough financial probe, a larger problem that entailed years of questionable transactions. Even if I had tried Rachel, I couldn't have planned it better. In the meantime, I hadn't spoken to anyone since our previous discussion. I hadn't heard from her, there were no calls or texts, and it seemed as though she had at last accepted the reality she had made for herself. On the third day, she broke. After accepting the reality she had made for herself, my phone rang while I was at home using my laptop, and I considered ignoring it. Rachel. I owed her nothing, but I felt compelled. to ask her how devastated she was, and she remained silent. Her erratic, trembling breathing was all I could hear at first. Then it became a whisper. "I'm not sure what to do, Matthew." I reclined in my chair and thought about how I stayed choked, despite everything falling apart, including my mom, family, and life. She kept talking while I waited in silence. "My father won't talk to me. My brother accuses me of being responsible for everything, and the police are calling our home every day to question my mother." I grinned. That's tough. She sucked, as our business partners were withdrawing out of deals. "Matthew, I lost everything in a single breath," she said, as I realized I had allowed the situation to get this bad. After a long period of time, during which she felt the weight of her own words, I ultimately said no. "I simply don't see why you threw everything away, Rachel." A soft sob came through the line. "You don't understand how it got this bad?" I cocked my head and spoke in a chilly tone. I sighed, sniffling. "I made a mistake." "No, Rachel. You made a number of decisions that decided to replace me at our wedding. You decided to listen to your mother, and now you're recognizing that you betrayed me." She shook her head and said, "I miss you, Matthew." I laughed. "You mean you miss the stability, the money, and the knowledge that no matter what, I'd always be available to clean up your mess?" "But that's untrue." She snapped, "Didn't she? Since you would be pleading with me to assist you at this moment if I were still Matthew, but you know I won't, and that scares you." She didn't react well to what I said, and my voice sounded like ice. "This is your new reality, Rachel, so sit in that terror and learn to live with it, and I'm not involved in it," she sobbed. "I don't want to be alone myself. Before you kicked me out, you ought to have considered it." With that, I ended the call. Rachel's family situation grew worse. Their family business was having problems, and investors were pulling away because they didn't want to be involved. Even Rachel's father, who had attempted to appear innocent, was being pulled into the scandal and fraud. Since her friends had deserted her, Rachel was officially ruined. After the wedding, everyone knew the whole truth about what she had done, and nobody wanted to be connected to her anymore. Her family blamed her for the catastrophe, saying that none of this would have occurred if she had simply married me. I nearly felt sorry for her, and a week later, Matthew, my lawyer, called me once more. I arched an eyebrow at Rachel's mother and allowed them to accept our settlement offer. My lawyer sounded amused as she let out a low whistle, demonstrating how desperate she was. I grinned and offered to pay you money if you agreed to dismiss the charges. I nearly smiled when she took $20,000 from me, and now she wants to pay $50 to resolve this. It's not simply my lawyer's money. Her voice became serious. And if this is true, the investigation is uncovering more information on her. If it goes to court, she might actually be facing jail time. This is her attempt to avoid it. I tapped my fingers against my desk, thinking that everything may end if I took the money. Yet, why would I offer her any favors?